usually come up. Zeno, the founder. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king. Maybe Epictetus, the former slave turned teacher. But far less attention is given to Seneca, even though in his own lifetime he was one of the most influential Stoic voices in Rome. And yet, Seneca presents us with a problem. He wrote some of the clearest and most practical explanations of Stoic philosophy that we have. He taught it, defended it, and then refined it. But when you look closely at his life, the alignment between his principles and his actions become far less certain. Today I'm going to read through Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. I'll be examining his writings and the tensions that they reveal. Along the way, I'll provide analysis to show the contrast between what Seneca wrote and how he actually lived. Let's get into it. Letter 2. Judging from what you tell me, and from what I hear, I feel that you show great promise. You do not tear from place to place and unsettle yourself with one move after another. Restlessness of that sort is symptomatic of a sick mind. Nothing, to my way of thinking, is a better proof of a well-ordered mind than a man's ability to stop just where he is and pass some time in his own company. Be careful, however, that there's no element of discursiveness and desultoriness about this reading you refer to, this reading of many different authors and books of every description. You should be extending your stay among writers whose genius is unquestionable, deriving constant nourishment from them if you wish to gain anything from your reading that will find a lasting place in your mind. To be everywhere is to be nowhere. People who spend their whole life traveling abroad end up having plenty of places where they can find hospitality, but no real friendships. The same must need be the case with people who never set about acquiring an intimate acquaintanceship with any one great writer but skip from one to another, paying flying visits to them all. Food that is vomited up as soon as it is eaten is not assimilated into the body and does not do any good. Nothing hinders a cure so much as frequent changes of treatment. A wound will not heal over if it is being made the subject of experiments with different ointments. A plant which is frequently moved never grows strong. Nothing is so useful that it can be of any service in the mere passing. A multitude of books only gets in one's way. So, if you're unable to read all the books in your possession, you have enough when you have all the books that you're able to read. And if you say, but I feel like opening different books at different times, my answer will be this. Tasting one dish after another is a sign of a fussy stomach, and where the foods are dissimilar and diverse in range, they lead to contamination of the system, not nutrition. So always read well-tried authors, and if at any moment you find yourself wanting a change from a particular author, go back to the ones you've read before. Each day, too, acquire something which will help to face poverty or death and other ills as well. After running over a lot of different thoughts, pick out one to be digested thoroughly that day. This is what I do myself. Out of the many bits that I have been reading, I lay hold of one. My thought for today is something which I have found in Epicurus. Yes, I actually make a practice of going over the enemy's camp by way of reconnaissance, not as a deserter. A cheerful poverty, he says, is an honorable state. But if it is cheerful, it is not poverty at all. It is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the one who hankers after more. What difference does it make how much there is laid away in a man's safe or in his barns, how many head of stock he grazes, or how much capital he puts out at interest, if he is always after what is another's and only counts what he has yet to get, never what he has already? You ask what is the proper limit to a person's wealth? First, having what is essential, and second, having what is enough. The paradox here is immediate and, frankly, a little uncomfortable. In Letter the Second, Seneca praises what he calls a cheerful poverty and defines true wealth as simply having what is essential and what is enough, and that's a characteristically Stoic move. Wealth in this framework is not measured by accumulation, but by sufficiency. The moment your needs are met, anything beyond that begins to shift from an asset to a burden. Excess then introduces anxiety. It creates dependence. It exposes you then to loss. In Stoic terms, wealth is not a number, it's a threshold. Once you cross that line of enough, more stops adding freedom and starts adding risk. But when we step outside the letter and into Seneca's life proper, the contrasts are, well, frankly striking. Seneca wasn't a man hovering around the line of sufficiency. He accumulated enormous wealth, he owned vast estates, and operated within the highest financial circles of Rome. In fact, ancient critics accused him of amassing hundreds of millions of sesterces in a short period of political favor. So, even if we treat these figures cautiously, the broader point stands. Seneca was not simply comfortable. He was extraordinarily rich, embarrassingly so. And then here we are, left with a very difficult question. Did Seneca believe what he was writing, or was he just rationalizing a life that contradicted his own ideals? And the easiest answer is to say it was just hypocrisy. He wasn't practicing what he preached. And it's very simple to accuse him of that, of preaching poverty while enjoying that massive privilege. However, it's my opinion that that explanation may be too shallow. Perhaps I'm just being hopeful here, but I think there might be another possibility. One that makes the letter a little bit more psychologically interesting at the very least. Seneca's reflections on wealth may not come from detachment, but from proximity. He had seen what extreme wealth looked like, and he had, in fact, participated in it. And he would have understood the dangers that come with it in a way that few philosophers ever did. See, in Rome, wealth wasn't merely comfort. It also meant exposure. It attracted envy. It invited political attacks. It made you visible to rivals and emperors alike. The richer you were, the more threatening you appeared to those people. And sure, wealth could protect you, but it was also the means to destroy you. It made you a very publicly visible target. It placed you inside networks of obligation, debt, and suspicion. And from that perspective, well, Seneca's insistence that true wealth is simply enough, it begins to sound less like romanticism and more like a defensive philosophy based on experience. When he redraws the definition of wealth here, he may actually be attempting to redraw the boundaries of his own moral safety. He couldn't realistically abandon his fortune. Doing so would have meant abandoning his influence, his protection, and his shot at survival. But he could attempt to reframe his relationship to it. If wealth is internal rather than external, then losing money didn't mean losing stability. If sufficiency was the goal, then abundance becomes morally neutral. And it's in that sense that the letter reads less like a manifesto written by a poor man and more like a coping strategy written by a very, very rich one. It's not necessarily insincere. It may have, in fact, been deeply sincere. However, it does carry the tension of someone trying to reconcile philosophy with circumstance. Seneca's praise of cheerful poverty does not erase his wealth. Instead, it reveals a strain of living with it while trying to remain a practicing Stoic. Letter 3. You have sent me a letter by the hand of a friend of yours, as you call him, and the next sentence you warn me to avoid discussing your affairs freely with him, since you are not even in the habit of doing so yourself. In other words, you have described him as being a friend and then denied this in one and the same letter. Now, if you were using that word in a kind of popular sense and not according to its strict meaning, and calling him a friend in much the same way as we refer to candidates as gentlemen, or hail someone with the greeting of my dear fellow, if when we meet him his name slips our memory, we can let this pass. However, if you are looking on anyone as a friend when you do not trust him as you trust yourself, you are making a grave mistake, and have failed to grasp sufficiently the full force of true friendship. Certainly, you should discuss everything with a friend, but before you do so, discuss in your mind the man himself. After friendship is formed, you must trust, but before that you must judge. Those who, contrary to Theophrastus's advice, judge a man after they have made him their friend instead of the other way around, certainly put the cart before the horse. Think for a long time whether or not you should admit a given person to your friendship. But when you have decided to do so, welcome him your heart and soul, and speak as unreservedly with him as you would with yourself. You should, I need hardly say, live in such a way that there is nothing which you could not as easily tell your enemy as keep to yourself. But seeing that certain matters do arise on which convention decrees silence, the things you should share with your friend are all your worries and deliberations. Regard him as loyal, and you will make him loyal. Some men's fear of being deceived has taught people to deceive them. By their suspiciousness, they give them right to do the wrong thing by them. Why should I keep back anything when I'm with a friend? Why shouldn't I imagine I'm alone when I'm in his company? There are certain people who tell any person they meet things that should only be confided to friends, unburdening themselves of whatever is on their minds into any ear they please. Others, again, are shy of confiding in their closest friends and would not even let themselves, if they could help it, into the secrets they keep hidden down inside of themselves. We should do neither. Trusting everyone is as much a fault as trusting no one, though I should call the first the worthier and the second the safer behavior. Similarly, people who never relax and people who are invariably in a relaxed state merit your disapproval, the former just as much as the latter. For a delight in bustling about is not industry. It is only the restless energy of a hunted mind. And the state of mind that looks on all activity as tiresome is not true repose, but a spineless inertia. This prompts me then to memorize something which I came across in Pomponius. Some men have shrunk so far into dark corners that objects in bright daylight seem quite blurred to them. A balanced combination of the two attitudes is what we want. The active man should be able to take things easily, while the man who is inclined towards repose should be capable of action. Ask nature. She will tell you that she made both day and night. In this letter, Seneca turns to friendship, and the tone becomes almost intimate. He tells Lucilius that choosing a friend should be done carefully, but once chosen, a trust must be absolute. The quote is, "After friendship is formed, you must trust, but before that you must judge." And I do love that quote. It's a sequence. You discern first, and then, after you've discerned, total openness comes second. Once someone has passed the test, you are meant to hold nothing back. You should speak to a friend as you would to yourself. There shouldn't be any performance and no strategic self-editing, no calculation about how your words might be used against you later. It's a powerful and deeply human vision of friendship. In Seneca's account, a true friend isn't a tool, an ally, or a convenience. He's another self. The relationship is based on moral alignment and mutual vulnerability, not gaining advantage. It's the opposite of networking. It's the opposite of politics. And that is precisely what makes that contrast so sharp. The Roman imperial court it wasn't built on trust. It was built on proximity to power. Speech was dangerous. Alliances shifted rapidly depending on favor, fear, and opportunity. A poorly judged comment could end in exile or worse, execution. And Seneca knew this from experience. He had already been banished once. During that exile, he wrote letters of calculated praise to powerful figures in an attempt to secure his return. And whatever we call it, it was not unreserved honesty. It was survival. Even after returning to Rome and rising to immense influence, his position was never secure. His relationships were entangled with ambition and threats. Enemies worked to undermine him. In such an environment, complete transparency wasn't just naive, it was dangerous. This context changes how we read the letter. It stops sounding like abstract moral advice and starts sounding like longing. Seneca isn't just describing the world he lives in, he's describing the world he wishes he could inhabit. In a system dominated by instrumental relationships, he sketches an ideal of unconditional loyalty. In a culture of guarded speech, he imagines radical openness. Rather than dismissing this as hypocrisy, it may be more accurate to see it as a psychological counterbalance. The more transactional his public life became, the more intensely he insisted, at least on paper, that real friendship must be something else entirely. The ideal grows stronger as the reality grows harsher. There's also something revealing in the way he frames trust. First, judge, then trust completely. That initial caution reflects someone who understands betrayal. This is not the advice of a naive man, it's the advice of someone who has seen what happens when trust is misplaced. The insistence on total openness comes after a filter, after careful selection. It's as if Seneca is trying to carve out a small, protected space of authenticity within a world that punishes it. In this sense, the letter becomes one of the most psychologically honest in the collection. It exposes a tension between the life that Seneca had to live and the kind of relationships that he believed were necessary for a good life. Power structures tend to erode sincerity. They reward performance and strategic loyalty. Seneca, positioned at the center of such a structure, articulates an opposing ideal with almost stubborn clarity. Whether he consistently lived up to that ideal is another question, but the intensity with which he describes it suggests that he understood, and perhaps understood painfully, what was missing. Letter 5. I view with pleasure and approval the way you keep on at your studies and sacrifice everything to your single-minded efforts to make yourself, every day, a better man. I do not merely urge you to persevere in this. I actually implore you to. Let me give you, though, this one piece of advice. Refrain from following the example of those whose craving is for attention, not their own improvement. By doing certain things which are calculated to give rise to comment on your appearance or way of living generally. Avoid shabby attire, long hair, an unkempt beard, and outspoken dislike of silverware, sleeping on the ground, and all other misguided means of self-advertisement. The very name of philosophy, however modest the manner in which it is pursued, is unpopular enough as it is. Imagine what the reaction would be if we started dissociating ourselves from the conventions of society. Inwardly, everything should be different, but our outward face should conform with the crowd. Our clothes should not be gaudy, yet they should not be dowdy either. We should not keep silver plate with inlays of solid gold, but at the same time we should not imagine that doing without gold and silver is proof that we are leading the simple life. Let our aim be a way of life not diametrically opposed to, but better than, that of the mob. Otherwise we shall repel and alienate the very people whose reform we desire. We shall make them, moreover, reluctant to imitate us anything for fear they may have to imitate us in everything. The first thing philosophy promises us is the feeling of fellowship, of belonging to mankind and being members of a community. Being different will mean the abandoning of that manifesto. We must watch that the means by which we hope to gain admiration do not earn ridicule and hostility. Our motto, as everyone knows, is to live in conformity with nature. It is quite contrary to nature to torture one's body, to reject simple standards of cleanliness and make a point of being dirty, to adopt a diet that is not just plain but hideous and revolting. In the same way as a craving for dainties is a token of extravagant living, avoidance of familiar and inexpensive dishes betokens insanity. Philosophy calls for simple living, not for doing penance, and the simple way of life need not be a crude one. The standard which I accept is this. One's life should be a compromise between the ideal and popular morality. People should admire our way of life, but they should at the same time find it understandable. Does that mean we are to act just like other people? Is there to be no distinction between us and them? Well, most certainly there is. Any close observer should be aware that we are different from the mob. Anyone entering our homes should admire us rather than our furnishings. It is a great man that can treat his earthenware as if it was silver, and a man who treats his silver as if it was earthenware is no less great. Finding wealth an intolerable burden is the mark of an unstable mind. But let me share with you, as usual, the day's small find, which today is something that I noticed in the Stoic writer Hecato. Limiting one's desire actually helps to cure one of fear. Cease to hope, he says, and you will cease to fear. But how, you will ask, can things be as diverse as these be linked? Well, the fact is, Lucilius, that they are bound up with one another, unconnected as they may seem. Wildly different though they are, the two of them march in unison like a prisoner and the escort that he is handcuffed to. Fear keeps pace with hope. Nor does their so moving together surprise me. Both belong to a mind in suspense, to a mind in a state of anxiety through looking into the future. Both are mainly due to projecting our thoughts far ahead of us instead of adapting ourselves to the present. Thus it is that foresight, the greatest blessing humanity has been given, is transformed into a curse. Wild animals run from the dangers they actually see, and once they have escaped them, they worry no more. We, however, are tormented alike by what is past and what is to come. A number of our blessings do us harm, for memory brings back the agony of fear, while foresight brings it on prematurely. No one confines his unhappiness to the present. In Letter 5, Seneca addresses the external appearance of the philosophical life. His position is more nuanced than we might expect. He does not encourage extreme asceticism. He does not praise sleeping on the ground, wearing deliberately torn clothing, or performing poverty as a spectacle. Philosophy, he insists, calls for simple living, not self-inflicted punishment. The goal isn't to look different for the sake of looking different. It's to live in a way that is inwardly disciplined, but outwardly unremarkable. Clothes shouldn't be gaudy, but they shouldn't be shabby either. The Stoic, in his view, should avoid both indulgence and theatrical deprivation, and this is a sophisticated stance. Seneca understands that moral seriousness can become a form of vanity. A philosopher who dresses in rags to signal virtue may simply be replacing one form of status with another, so then he advocates balance. Blend in, avoid excess, let your character, not your costume, distinguish you. However, this is where the historical irony starts to press in. Seneca was not merely a man who dressed modestly while quietly owning a few investments. He was one of the wealthiest figures in Rome. Ancient sources describe accusations of immense luxury, including banquets served on hundreds of identical citrus wood tables with ivory legs. Whatever these accounts were exaggerated by political enemies or not, they circulated widely. They were plausible enough to damage his reputation. His wealth was visible, his influence was visible. He did not appear to many observers as a man living on the edge of simplicity. And this creates a tension between intention and perception. Seneca may have sincerely believed he was living moderately relative to his environment. Among Rome's elite, extravagance wasn't rare. It was expected, in fact. Villas, estates, elaborate feasts, displays of status were part of the social fabric, and in that context, Seneca might have considered himself restrained. Perhaps he believed he was exercising internal detachment even while possessing external wealth. But philosophy doesn't operate in a vacuum. It exists in the eyes of others as well. From the outside, especially to critics who resented his power, he appeared to embody precisely the kind of opulence Stoicism warned against. The man advising moderation was surrounded by extraordinary comfort. The message and the image just did not align. What makes this especially interesting is how gradual moral compromise can be. Excess rarely feels like excess at first. It becomes normalized slowly, especially when everyone around you operates at a similar or higher level of indulgence. Standards shift. What once felt like luxury becomes your baseline. In such an environment, it's possible that you believe that you're living simply while objectively inhabiting extraordinary privilege. This is where the philosophical drama deepens. Seneca's letter may reflect the internal standard he believed he was meeting. He was not advocating self-punishment. He was advocating measured restraint within the life that he had. But history judges him by a different measure. The gap between how he saw himself and how others saw him becomes a part of the story then. Letter 5 is not just about clothing or banquets. It's about self-awareness. It forces us to ask whether it is possible to remain truly moderate while embedded in systems built on excess. Seneca's answer, on paper, is yes. The way he lived his life, though, makes that answer harder to accept without qualification. It's my opinion, though, that it's precisely that tension that keeps the question both alive and interesting. Letter 6. I see in myself, Lucilius, not just an improvement, but a transformation. Although I would not venture as yet to assure you, or even to hope, that there is nothing left in me needing to be changed. Naturally, there are a lot of things about me requiring to be built up or fined down or eliminated. Even this, the fact that it perceives the failings it was unaware of in itself before, is evidence of a change for the better in one's character. In the case of some sick people, it is a matter for congratulation when they come to realize for themselves that they are sick. I should very much like, then, to share this all so sudden metamorphosis of mine with you. Doing so would make me start to feel a surer faith in the friendship that exists between us, that true friendship which not hope, nor fear, nor concern for personal advantage ever sunders. Doing so would make me start to feel a surer faith in the friendship that exists between us, that true friendship which not hope, nor fear, nor concern for personal advantage ever sunders, that friendship in which and for which people are ready to die. I can give you plenty of examples of people who have not been lacking a friend, but friendship. Something that can never happen when mutual inclination draws two personalities together in a fellowship of desire for all that is honorable. Why cannot it happen? Because they know that everything, and especially their setbacks, is shared between them. You can't imagine how much of an alteration I see each day bringing about in me. Send me too, you will be saying, the things you found so effectual. Indeed, I desire to transfer every one of them to you. Part of my joy in learning is that it puts me in a position to teach. Nothing, however outstanding and however helpful, will ever give me any pleasure if the knowledge is to be for my benefit alone. If wisdom were offered me on the one condition that I should keep it shut away and not divulge it to anyone, I should reject it. There is no enjoying the possession of anything valuable unless one has something to share it with. I shall send you, accordingly, the actual books themselves, and to save you a lot of trouble hunting all over the place for passages likely to be of use to you, I shall mark the passages so that you can turn straight away to the words I approve and admire. Personal converse, though, and daily intimacy with someone will be of more benefit to you than any discourse. You should really be here and on the spot. Firstly, because people believe their eyes rather more than their ears, and secondly, because the road is a long one if one proceeds by way of precepts, but short and effectual if by way of personal example. Cleanthes would never have been the image of Zeno if he had merely heard him lecture. He lived with him, studied his private life, watched him to see if he lived in accordance with his own principle. Plato, Aristotle, and a host of other philosophers, all destined to take different paths, derived more from Socrates' character than from his words. It was not Epicurus' school, but living under the same roof as Epicurus that turned Metrodorus, Hermarchus, and Polyanus into great men. And yet I do not summon you to my side solely for the sake of your own progress, but for my own as well. For we shall be of the utmost benefit to each other. Meanwhile, since I owe you the daily allowance, I'll tell you what took my fancy in the writings of Hecato today. What progress have I made? I am beginning to be my own friend. That is progress indeed. Such a person will never be alone, and you may be sure he is a friend of all. In letter 6, Seneca adopts a tone of personal humility. He tells Lucilius that he's not yet the man that he wants to be. There are aspects of his character that need to be strengthened, refined, or removed altogether. He speaks as someone in transition, someone consciously engaged in self-improvement. Recognizing one's own faults, he suggests, is itself a sign of philosophical progress. The letter feels introspective and honest. He doesn't present himself as a completed Stoic sage, but as a work in progress. That admission complicates the easy accusation of hypocrisy. A hypocrite typically claims moral superiority while secretly violating their own standards. Now, here we have Seneca, by contrast, openly acknowledging his own imperfections. He doesn't pretend to have mastered himself. He portrays philosophy as an ongoing process, not a finished achievement. However, when we place this self-critique against the broader historical backdrop, the understatement becomes almost jarring. The same general period of his life included some of the most morally troubling events in Nero's reign. When Nero arranged the murder of his mother Agrippina, Seneca was involved in drafting the official explanation sent to the Senate. He helped manage the political narrative around an act that was, by any standard, a brutal consolidation of power. He remained close to the emperor as violence and paranoia escalated. These weren't minor lapses in patience or pride, they were entanglements in the machinery of autocracy. What is striking is that none of this appears directly in the letters. The focus always remains inward, on character, discipline, emotional regulation, progress in virtue. The moral conversation is framed almost entirely as a private psychological endeavor. There is little to no discussion of the ethical implications of serving a regime capable of murder and repression. And to me, at least, this omission is revealing. It creates the impression that Seneca's philosophical identity and his political role exist in parallel rather in dialogue with one another. On the page, he's a man refining his soul. In reality, he's navigating the ethical compromises of imperial power. The two worlds rarely collide explicitly in his writing. And there may be practical reasons for this silence. Writing openly about imperial wrongdoing would have been dangerous and possibly fatal. Even subtle criticism could be interpreted as disloyalty. Seneca may have deliberately confined his philosophical reflections to safe terrain. But beyond strategy, there may also be a psychological dimension to this. Compartmentalization is a powerful human mechanism. It allows individuals to separate their internal self-image from their external actions. By framing his moral development as an inner project, Seneca could preserve a sense of progress even while participating in morally compromised systems. Philosophy becomes a protected space, an arena where he can still pursue virtue without directly confronting the full weight of political complicity. Now, this does not necessarily mean he was insincere. It may mean he was conflicted. Letter 6 reads like the testimony of someone aware of personal imperfection but unwilling or unable to articulate the larger structural moral failures around him. The self he critiques is a private self, not the statesman drafting letters for an emperor. In this way, the letter exposes something deeply human. It shows how easily we narrow the scope of our moral self-examination. We focus on temperament, on habits, on personal growth, while leaving larger ethical entanglements untouched. Seneca's acknowledgement that he has a lot of things to eliminate is genuine, but history suggests that the list was far longer and far more serious than the letter allows him to admit. Letter 7. You ask me to say what you should consider it particularly important to avoid. My answer is this: a mass crowd. It is something to which you cannot entrust yourself, yet without risk. I, at any rate, am ready to confess my own frailty in this respect. I never come back home with quite the same moral character that I went out with. Something or other becomes unsettled where I had achieved internal peace. Some one or other of the things I had put to flight reappears on the scene. We who are recovering from a prolonged spiritual sickness are in the same condition as invalids who had been affected to such an extent by prolonged indisposition that they cannot once be taken out of doors without ill effects. Associating with people in large numbers is actually harmful. There is not one of them that will not make some vice or other attractive to us. or leave us carrying the imprint of it, or be daubed all unawares with it. And, inevitably enough, the larger the size of the crowd that we mingle with, the greater the danger. But nothing is as ruinous to the character as sitting away one's time at a show. For it is then, through the medium of entertainment, that vices creep into one with more than usual ease. What do you take me to mean? That I go home more selfish, more self-seeking, and more self-indulgent? Yes. And what is more, a person crueler and less humane through having been in contact with human beings. I happened to go to one of these shows at the time of the lunch hour interlude, expecting there to be some light and witty entertainment then, some respite from the purpose of affording people's eyes a rest from human blood. Far from it. All the earlier contests were charity in comparison. The nonsense is dispensed with now. What we have now is murder, pure and simple. The combatants have nothing to protect them. Their whole bodies are exposed to the blows. Every thrust they launch gets home. A great many spectators prefer this to the ordinary matches and even to the special popular demand ones. And, quite naturally, there are no helmets and no shields repelling the weapons. What is the point of armor or of skill? All that sort of thing just makes the death slower in coming. In the morning, men are thrown to the lions and the bears, but it is the spectators they are thrown to in the lunch hour. The spectators insist that each, on killing his man, shall be thrown against another to be killed in his turn, and the eventual victor is reserved by them for some other form of butchery. The only exit for the contestants is death. Fire and steel keep the slaughter going, and all this happens while the arena is virtually empty. But he was a highway robber. He killed a man. And what of it? Granted that, as a murderer, he deserved this punishment. What have you done, you wretched fellow, to deserve to watch it? Kill him, flog him, burn him. Why does he run at the other man's weapon in such a cowardly way? Why isn't he less half-hearted about killing? Why isn't he a bit more enthusiastic about dying? Whip him forward to get him wound. Make them each offer the other a bare breast and trade blow for blow on them. And when there's an interval in the show, let's have some throats cut in the meantime so that there's something happening. Come now, I say. Surely you people realize, if you realize nothing else, that bad examples have a way of recoiling on those who set them. Give thanks to the immortal gods that the men to whom you are giving a lesson in cruelty are not in a position to profit from it. When a mind is impressionable and has none too firm a hold on what is right, it must be rescued from the crowd. It is so easy for it to go over to the majority. A Socrates, a Cato, or a Laelius might have been shaken in his principles by a multitude of people different from himself. Such is the measure of the inability of any of us, even as we perfect our personality's adjustment, to withstand the onset of vices when they come with such a mighty following. A simple example of extravagance or greed does a lot of harm. An intimate who leads a pampered life gradually makes one soft and flabby. A wealthy neighbor provokes cravings in one. A companion with a malicious nature tends to rub off some of his rust even on someone of an innocent and open-hearted nature. What then do you imagine the effect on a person's character is when the assault comes from the world at large? You must inevitably either hate or imitate the world. But the right thing is to shun both courses. You should neither become like the bad because there are many, nor be an enemy of the many because they are unlike you. Retire into yourself as much as you can. Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those whom you are capable of improving. The process is a mutual one. Men learn as they teach. And there is no reason why any pride in advertising your talents abroad should lure you forward into the public eye, inducing you to give readings of your works or to deliver lectures. I should be glad to see you doing that if what you had to offer them was suitable for the crowd I have been talking about. But the fact is, not one of them is really capable of understanding you. You might come across one here and there, but even they would need to be trained and developed by you to a point where they grasp your teaching. For whose benefit then did I learn at all? If it was for your own benefit that you learnt, you would have no call to fear that your trouble may have been wasted. Just to make sure that I have not been learning solely for my own benefit today, let me share with you 3 fine quotations I have come across, each concerned with something like the same idea. One of them is by way of payment for the usual debt so far as this letter is concerned, and the other 2 you are to regard as an advance on account. To me, says Democritus, a single man is a crowd, and a crowd is a single man. Equally good is the answer given by the person, whoever it was, his identity is uncertain, who when asked what was the object of all the trouble he took over a piece of craftsmanship, when it would never reach more than a very few people, he replied, "A few is enough for me. So is one, and so is none." The third is a nice expression used by Epicurus in a letter to one of his colleagues. "I am writing this," he says, "not for the eyes of the many, but for yours alone. For each of us is audience enough for the other. Lay these up in your heart, my dear Lucilius, that you may scorn the pleasure that comes from the majority's approval. The many speak highly of you, but have you really any grounds for satisfaction with yourself if you are the kind of person the many understand? Your merits should not be outward-facing." Are you, of all people, you write, really telling me to avoid the crowd, to retire from the world and find contentment in a good conscience? Where are those Stoic rules of yours that call on a man to die in harness? Come now, do I really give you the impression that I advocate a life of inactivity? I have only buried myself away behind closed doors in order to be able to be of use to more people. With me, no day is ever whiled away at ease. I claim a good part of my nights for study. I have no time for sleep. I just succumb to it, keeping my eyes at their work when they are heavy-lidded and exhausted from lack of rest. I have withdrawn from affairs as well as from society, and from my own affairs in particular. I am acting on behalf of later generations. I'm writing down a few things that may be of use to them. I'm committing to writing some helpful recommendations, which might be compared to the formulae of successful medications, the effectiveness of which I have experienced in the case of my own sores, which may not have been completely cured, but have at least ceased to spread. I am pointing out to others the right path, which I have recognized only late in life, when I am worn out with my wanderings. Avoid, I cry, whatever is approved of by the mob and the things that are the gift of chance. Whenever circumstance brings some welcome thing your way, stop in suspicion and alarm. Wild animals and fish alike are taken in by this or that inviting prospect. Do you look on them as presents given to you by fortune? They are snares. Anyone among you who wishes to lead a secure life will do his very best to steer well wide of these baited bounties, which comprise yet another instance of the errors we miserable creatures fall into. We think these things are ours, when in fact it is we who are caught. That track leads to precipices. Life on that giddy level ends in a fall. Once, moreover, prosperity begins to carry us off course. We are no more capable of bringing the ship to a standstill than of going down with the consolation that she has been held on her course, or of going down once and for all. Fortune does not just capsize the boat. She hurls it headlong on the rocks and dashes it to pieces. Cling, therefore, to this sound and wholesome plan of life. Indulge the body just so far as suffices for good health. It needs to be treated somewhat strictly to prevent it from being disobedient to the spirit. Your food should appease your hunger. Your drink quench your thirst. Your clothing keep out the cold. Your house be a protection against inclement weather. It makes no difference whether it is built of turf or of variegated marble imported from another country. What you have to understand is that thatch makes a person just as good a roof as gold does. Spurn everything that is added on by way of decoration and display by unnecessary labor. reflect that nothing merits admiration except the spirit, the impressiveness of which prevents it from being impressed by anything. If these are the things I'm saying to myself, if these are the things I'm saying to future generations, don't you think I'm doing more good than when I go into court to enter into recognizance on someone's behalf, or stamp my seal on a will, or lend my assistance by word or action in the Senate to some candidate for office? Those who appear inactive are, believe me, engaged in far more important activity. They're dealing with matters divine and human at the same moment. But the time has come to make an end, and in accordance with the practice I've started to make some disbursement on this letter's behalf. For this I shall not draw on my own resources. I'm still turning over the pages of Epicurus, and the following saying, one I read today, comes from him. I'm still turning over the pages of Epicurus, and the following saying, one I read today, comes from him. To win true freedom, you must be a slave to philosophy. A person who surrenders and subjects himself to her doesn't have his application deferred from day to day. He's emancipated on the spot. The very service of philosophy being freedom. Quite possibly, you'll be demanding to know why I'm quoting so many fine sayings from Epicurus rather than ones belonging to our own school. But why should you think of them as belonging to Epicurus and not as common property? Think, how many poets say things that philosophers have said, or ought to have said, not to mention the tragedians or our native Roman drama, which has a serious element in it as well and stands halfway between comedy and tragedy. Think of the number of Publilius's verses that really ought to be spoken by actors wearing the tragic buskins instead of the barefooted pantomime actors. I'll quote one verse of his which belongs to philosophy, and the same facet of philosophy that I was occupied with just now, a verse in which he proclaims that gifts which chance brings our way are not to be regarded as possessions. If you pray a thing may, and it does come your way, 'tis a long way from being your own. I recall your expressing the same idea a good deal more happily and succinctly. What fortune has made yours is not your own. And I can't pass over that even happier expression of yours. The boon that could be given can be withdrawn. This being from your own stock, I'm not debiting it to your account. In letters 7 and 8, the contradiction becomes more than personal. It becomes structural. Seneca warns Lucilius about the moral dangers of the crowd. Public spectacles degrade character. Large gatherings erode judgment. Exposure to the mob reshapes values in subtle but corrosive ways. His advice is clear. Retreat into yourself. Limit your exposure. Guard your inner life. He even goes further, claiming that he himself has withdrawn from public affairs and now lives for philosophy and future generations. On the surface, this sounds like the voice of a man who has stepped away from power, a reflective elder statesman who has seen enough of politics to know its cost. But historically, at the height of his influence, Seneca was anything but withdrawn. Alongside Burrus, he was effectively running the Roman Empire during the early years of Nero's reign. He helped design legal reforms, shaped fiscal policy, drafted speeches, and stabilized the administration of one of the most powerful political systems in the world. This was not peripheral involvement, it was central authority. And that's what makes the contradiction so striking. The man warned against the corrupting force of the crowd, but was deeply embedded in the largest and most volatile crowd of all, the Roman political elite. He was not observing power from a distance, he was exercising it. There are several possible interpretations to this. Chronology is one. Some scholars argue that the parts of the letter may have been written or revised later in his life, after his political influence began to wane. If that was the case, the claim of withdrawal could reflect a genuine shift. As Nero grew more independent and unpredictable, Seneca did attempt to step back. He requested permission to retire. He offered to return portions of his wealth. In that light, the language of retreat may not be pure fiction, but the record of a man trying to disentangle himself from a regime he could no longer guide. But even if we grant that, the earlier years of intense political involvement remain. Withdrawal, if it occurred, came after deep entanglement. The fact that he once governed at the highest level cannot be erased by later philosophical distancing. Another interpretation is psychological rather than chronological. For a Stoic, retreat doesn't necessarily mean abandoning office. It could mean cultivating inner independence while remaining externally active. The Stoic ideal is not always physical escape from society, but freedom from emotional dependency on it. In this sense, Seneca may have been attempting to practice detachment within engagement. He could hold power without being owned by it. He could operate in public life while guarding a private, philosophical core. And I will admit, this reading is charitable, and it aligns with Stoic doctrine, but the scale of Seneca's involvement makes the language difficult to accept without tension. Running an empire is not a minor civic duty. It demands constant negotiation, compromise, and strategic maneuvering. To describe oneself as withdrawn while actively shaping imperial policy feels at best aspirational. At worst, it borders on self-deception. This raises a deeper possibility, though. Philosophy may have functioned for Seneca as an alternate identity. On the page, he's the reflective sage, warning against crowds and ambition. In reality, he's the statesman, navigating ambition at the highest level. The letters allow him to narrate himself as the kind of person he wished to be, even if his circumstances required something else. If that is true, then letters 7 and 8 reveal more than inconsistency. They reveal tension between self-conception and social role. Seneca may have genuinely believed that his inner life was separate from his public function. He could govern by day and philosophize by night, convincing himself that the true self resided in the latter. Whether that separation was sustainable is another matter. But the letters show a man attempting to reconcile immense public responsibility with the Stoic demand for inner withdrawal. The contradiction is not simply between words and actions, it is between two identities that Seneca tried, perhaps unsuccessfully, to hold together. Letter 9. You desire to know whether Epicurus is right in one of his letters in criticizing those who maintain that the wise man is content with himself and therefore needs no friend. This is what Epicurus objects to in Stilbo and those, the philosophers of the Cynic school, who believe that the supreme ideal in life is a mind devoid of feeling, or as we say, empathians. We are bound to involve ourselves in ambiguity if we try to express, in a single word, the meaning of the Greek term apatheia, by transferring it straight into our word impatientia. For it may be understood in the opposite sense to the one we wish, with people taking it to signify the man who is unable to endure anything that goes badly for him, instead of what we mean by it, the man who refuses to allow anything that goes badly for him to affect him. Consider, then, whether it might not be preferable to call it a mind that is invulnerable or above all suffering. The difference here between the Epicurean and our own school is this: our wise man feels his troubles but overcomes them, while their wise man does not even feel them. We share with them the belief that the wise man is content with himself. Nevertheless, self-sufficient though he is, he still desires a friend, a neighbor, a companion. Notice how self-contented he is. On occasion, such a man is content with a mere partial self. If he loses a hand as a result of war or disease, or one of his eyes, or even both, put out in an accident, say, he will be satisfied with what remains of himself and be no less pleased with his body now that it is maimed and incomplete than he was when it was whole. But while he does not hanker after what he has lost, he does prefer not to lose them. And this is what we mean when we say that the wise man is self-content. He is so in the sense that he is able to do without them, not that he desires to do without them. When I speak of his being able to do this, what I am saying in fact amounts to this. Not that he will then be without a friend, for it is his to decide how soon he makes good the loss. Just as Phidias can carve another statue straight away if he loses one, so our wise man, with his skill in the art of making friends, will fill the place of someone he has lost. I suppose you will want to know how he will be able to make a friend so quickly. Well, I shall tell you, provided we agree that I make this the moment to pay my debt and square my account so far as this letter is concerned. I shall show you, said Hecato, a love phaetra, compounded without drug or herb or witch's spell. It is this: if you wish to be loved, love. Great pleasure is to be found not only in keeping up an old and established friendship, but also in beginning and building up a new one. There is the same difference between having gained a friend and actually gaining a friend as there is between a farmer harvesting and a farmer sowing. The philosopher Attalus used to say that it was more of a pleasure to make a friend than to have one, in the same way as an artist derives more pleasure from painting than from having completed a picture. When his whole attention is absorbed in concentration on the work he is engaged on, a tremendous sense of satisfaction is created in him by his very absorption. There is never quite the same gratification after he has lifted his hand from the finished work. From then on, what he is enjoying is the art's end product, whereas it was the art itself that he enjoyed while he was actually painting. So with our children, their growing up brings wider fruits, but their infancy was sweeter. To come back to the question, the wise man, self-sufficient as he is, still desires to have a friend if only for the purpose of practicing friendship and ensuring that those talents are not idle. Not, as Epicurus put in the same letter, for the purpose of having someone to come and sit beside his bed when he is ill, or to come to his rescue when he is hard up or thrown into chains, but so that on the contrary he may have someone by whose sickbed he himself may sit, or whom he may himself release when that person is held prisoner by hostile hands. Anyone thinking of his own interests and seeking out friendship with this in view is making a great mistake. Things will end as they began. He has secured a friend who is going to come to his aid if captivity threatens. At the first clank of a chain, that friend will then disappear. These are what are commonly called fair-weather friendships. A person adopted as a friend for the sake of his usefulness will be cultivated only for so long as he is useful. This explains the crowd of friends that clusters about successful men and the lonely atmosphere about the ruined, their friends running away when it comes to the testing point. It explains the countless scandalous instances of people deserting or betraying others out of fear for themselves. The ending inevitably matches the beginning. A person who starts being friends with you because it pays him will similarly cease to be friends because it pays him to do so. If there is anything in a particular friendship that attracts a man other than the friendship itself, the attraction of some reward or other will counterbalance that of the friendship. What is my object, then, in making a friend? To have someone to be able to die for, someone I may follow into exile, someone for whose life I may put myself up as security and pay the price as well. The thing you describe is not friendship, but a business deal, looking to the likely consequences with advantage as the goal. There can be no doubt that the desire lovers have for each other is not so very different from friendship. You might say it was friendship gone mad. Well then, does anyone ever fall in love with a view to a profit or advancement or celebrity? Actual love in itself, heedless of all other considerations, inflames people's hearts with a passion for that beautiful object, not without the hope, too, that the affection will be mutual. How then can the nobler stimulus of friendship be associated with any ignoble desire? You may say we are not at present concerned with the question whether friendship is something to be cultivated for its own sake, but this, on the contrary, is exactly what needs proving most. For if friendship is something to be sought out for its own sake, the self-contented man is entitled to pursue it. And how does he approach it? In the same way as he would any object of great beauty, not drawn by gain, not out of alarm at the vicissitudes of fortune, To procure friendship only for better and not for worse is to rob it of all of its dignity. The wise man is content with himself. A lot of people, Lucilius, put quite the wrong interpretation on this statement. They remove the wise man from all contact with the world outside, shutting him up inside his own skin. We must be quite clear about the meaning of this sentence and just how much it claims to say. It applies to him so far as happiness in life is concerned. For this, all he needs is a rational and elevated spirit that treats fortune with disdain. For the actual business of living, he needs a great number of things. I should like to draw your attention to a similar distinction made by Chrysippus. The wise man, he said, lacked nothing but needed a great number of things, whereas the fool, on the other hand, needs nothing, for he does not know how to use anything, but lacks everything. The wise man needs hands and eyes and a great number of things that are required for the purpose of day-to-day life, but he lacks nothing, for lacking something implies that it is a necessity, and nothing, to the wise man, is a necessity. Self-contented as he is, then, he does need friends, and wants as many of them as possible, but not to enable him to lead a happy life. This he will have even without the friends. The supreme ideal does not call for any external aid. It is homegrown, wholly self-developed. Once it starts looking outside itself or any part of itself, it is on the way to being dominated by fortune. But what sort of life, people may say, will the wise man have if he is going to be left without any friends when he is thrown into prison, or stranded among foreigners, or detained in the course of a voyage in distant parts, or cast away on some desert shore? It will be like that of Jove while nature takes her rest, of brief duration when the universe is dissolved and the gods are all merged in one, finding repose in himself, absorbed in his own thoughts. Such is more or less the way of the wise man. He retires to his inner self, in his own company. So long, in fact, as he remains in a position to order his affairs according to his own judgment, even when he brings up his children. He is self-content, and yet he would refuse to live if he had to live without any human company at all. Natural promptings, not thoughts of any advantage to himself, impel him towards friendship. We are born with a sense of the pleasantness of friendship just as of other things. In the same way as there exists in man a distaste for solitude and a craving for society, natural instinct drawing one human being to another, so too, with this, there is something inherent in it that stimulates us into seeking friendships. The wise man, nevertheless, unequaled though he is in his devotion to his friends, though regarding them as being no less important and frequently more important than his own self, will still consider what is valuable in life to be something wholly confined to his inner self. He will repeat the words of Stilbo, the Stilbo whom Epicurus's letter attacks, when his hometown was captured and he emerged from the general conflagration. His children lost, his wife lost, alone, and nonetheless a happy man, and was questioned by Demetrius. Asked by this man, known from the destruction he dealt out to towns, as Demetrius the city sacker, whether he had lost anything, he replied, "I have all my valuables with me." There was an active and courageous man, victorious over the very victory of the enemy. "I have lost," he said, "nothing." He made Demetrius wonder whether he had won a victory at all. "All my possessions," he said, "are with me," meaning by this the qualities of a just, a good, and an enlightened character, and indeed the very fact of not regarding as valuable anything that is capable of being taken away. We are impressed at the way some creatures pass right through fire without physical harm. How much more impressive it is the way this man came through the burning and the bloodshed and the ruins uninjured and unscathed. Does it make you see how much easier it can be to conquer a whole people than to conquer a single man? Those words of Stilbo's are equally those of the Stoic. He carries his valuables intact through cities burnt to ashes, for he is contented with himself. This is the line he draws as the boundary for his happiness. In case you imagine that we Stoics are the only people who produce noble sayings, let me tell you something. See that you put this down to my credit, even though I have already settled my account with you for today. Epicurus himself, who has nothing good to say for Stilbo, has uttered a statement quite like this one of Stilbo's. Any man, he says, who does not think that what he has is more than ample is an unhappy man, even if he is the master of the whole world. Or, if you prefer to see it expressed like this, the point being that we should be ruled not by the actual words used but by the sense of them, a man is unhappy though he reign the world over, if he does not consider himself supremely happy. To show you, indeed, that these are sentiments of a universal character prompted, evidently by nature herself, you will find the following verse in a comic poet. Not happy he who thinks himself not so. The authorship is, unfortunately, unknown. What difference does it make, after all, what your position is in life if you dislike it yourself? What about so-and-so, you may ask? Who became rich in such a despicable manner, or such and such a person who gives orders to a great many people, but is at the mercy of a great many more? Supposing they say they are happy, will their own opinion of this effect make them happy? It does not make any difference what a man says. What matters is how he feels, and not how he feels on one particular day, but how he feels at all times. But you have no need to fear that so valuable a thing may fall into unworthy hands. Only the wise man is content with what is his. All foolishness suffers the burden of dissatisfaction with itself. A long-winded one. In Letter 9, Seneca offers a remarkably sober assessment of human relationships. A friendship built on usefulness, he warns, will last only as long as that usefulness continues. The moment circumstances change, that bond dissolves. At the first hint of danger, the so-called friend disappears. There's no outrage in his tone and no surprise. It is written as a simple fact about human behavior. If a relationship is grounded in advantage, it will collapse when advantage disappears. This is not the language of idealism. This is the language of someone who has watched it happen. And when we look at Seneca's own life, the insight feels autobiographical. He was recalled from exile not because of personal devotion, but because Agrippina believed he would be politically useful in shaping the young Nero. His return to Rome was strategic. His rise to power was strategic. For years, his influence endured because he was valuable. He could draft speeches, stabilize policy, restrain the emperor's worst impulses, and lend intellectual legitimacy to the regime. But usefulness is fragile. When Burrus died and Nero began asserting himself more independently, Seneca's strategic value diminished. Enemies at court gained ground. Suspicion grew. The protection that once surrounded him began to weaken. The same system that elevated him began to close in. Loyalty shifted with the emperor's priorities. In the end, Seneca's position eroded not because of philosophical disagreement, but because of political recalculation. This context transforms Letter 9 from abstract ethics into lived analysis. Seneca was not speculating about fair-weather friends, he had experienced them. He understood that in elite Roman politics, relationships were rarely unconditional, they were alliances. And alliances are contingent by design. What gives the letter its force is the absence of bitterness. He doesn't rage against the system, he is simply describing it. And that clarity in which he describes it suggests familiarity. He had benefited from transactional loyalty. He had survived because of it. And eventually, he would suffer from it. That insight cuts both ways. His rejection of such relationships then feels less like moral superiority and more like exhaustion. There's a weariness in recognizing that bonds built on advantage cannot provide security. The Stoic ideal of friendship as a meeting of character stands in stark contrast with the unstable world that he navigated daily. In this case, the contrast between his philosophy and his life does not undermine his credibility, it strengthens it. Letter 9 reads like the reflection of someone who has seen how power operates and found it insufficient. The philosophy is not detached from reality, it's born from it. Seneca's analysis of transactional friendship carries weight precisely because he understood, from the inside, how such relationships are formed, sustained, and eventually broken. Letter 11. I have had a conversation with your talented friend. From the very beginning of his talk with me, it was apparent what considerable gifts of character and intelligence he possesses. He gave me a foretaste of his capabilities, to which he will certainly live up, for the things he said, caught as he was quite off of his guard, were entirely unrehearsed. As he was recovering his self-possession, he could scarcely get over his embarrassment, always a good sign in a young man. So deep had the blush been that suffused his face. This, I rather suspect, will remain with him even when he has built up his character and stripped it of all his weakness, even when he has become a wise man. For no amount of wisdom enables one to do away with physical or mental weaknesses that arise from natural causes. Anything inborn or ingrained in one can, by dint of practice, be allayed but not overcome. When they face a crowd of people, some men, even ones with the stoutest of hearts, break into the sort of sweat one usually sees on persons in an overheated and exhausted state. Some men experience a trembling at the knees when they are about to speak, some a chattering of the teeth, a stuttering tongue, or stammering lips. These are things which neither training nor experience ever eliminates. Nature just wields her power and uses the particular weakness to make even the strongest conscious of her. One of these things that I well know is a blush, which has a habit of suddenly reddening the faces of men of even the most dignified demeanor. It is, of course, more noticeable in the young, with their hotter blood and sensitive complexions. Nevertheless, seasoned men and aging men alike are affected by it. Some men are more to be feared on the occasions when they flush than at any other time, as if in so doing they let loose all their inhibitions. Sulla was at his wildest when the blood has rushed to his visage. No features were more susceptible than Pompey's. He never failed to blush in company, and particularly at public meetings. I remember Fabianus blushing when he appeared to give evidence before the Senate, and this bashfulness looked wonderfully well on him. When this happens, it is not due to some mental infirmity, but to the unfamiliarity of some situation or other, which may not necessarily strike any alarm into inexperienced people, but does produce a reaction in them if they are thus liable through having a natural physical predisposition to it. Certain people have good, ordinary blood, and others just have an animated, lively sort of blood that comes to the face quickly. No amount of wisdom, as I said before, ever banishes these things. Otherwise, if she eradicated every weakness, wisdom would have dominion over the world of nature. One's physical makeup and the attributes that were one's lot at birth remain so settled, no matter how much or how long the personality may strive after perfect adjustment. One cannot ban these things any more than one can call them up. The tokens used to portray embarrassment by professional actors, those actors who portray emotion, simulate unhappiness and reproduce for us fear and apprehension, are a hanging of the head, a dropping of the voice, a casting down of the eyes and keeping them fixed on the ground. A blush is something they can never manage to reproduce. It is something that will neither be summoned up nor be told to stay away. Against these things, philosophy holds out no remedy and avails one nothing. They are quite independent. They come unbidden, they go unbidden. But my letter calls for a conclusion. Here is one for you. One that will serve you in good stead too, which I'd like you to take to heart. We need to set our affections on some good man and keep him constantly before our eyes, so that we may live as if he were watching us and do everything as if he saw what we were doing. This, my dear Lucilius, is Epicurus's advice, and in given that he has given us a guardian and a moral tutor, and not without reason either, Misdeeds are greatly diminished if a witness is always standing near intending doers. The personality should be provided with someone it can revere, someone whose influence can make even its private inner life more pure. Happy the man who improves other people, not merely when he is in their presence, but even when he is in their thoughts. And happy, too, is the person who can so revere another as to adjust and shape his own personality in the light of recollections, even of that other. A person able to revere another thus will soon deserve to be revered himself. So choose yourself a Cato, or, if Cato seems too severe for you, a Laelius, a man whose character is not quite so strict. Choose someone whose way of life as well as words, and whose very face, as mirroring the character that lies behind it, have won your approval. Be always pointing him out to yourself, either as your guardian or your model. There is a need, in my view, for someone as a standard against which our characters can measure themselves. Without a ruler to do it against, you won't make the crooked straight. In letter 11, Seneca introduces a practical psychological exercise. If you want to improve your character, he says, choose a moral exemplar and keep that person constantly in mind. Live as if he were watching you. Let his imagined presence regulate your behavior. The idea is simple but powerful. Human beings act differently when they feel observed. By internalizing a model of virtue, you create an inner witness that disciplines impulse and sharpens conscience. It's a technique grounded in Stoic moral training, but it also anticipates modern psychology. We become like the standards that we hold before ourselves. The irony, however, is difficult to ignore. Seneca himself was meant to be that exemplar for Nero. As tutor and later chief advisor, he occupied the role of moral guardian to a young emperor with absolute power. If anyone was positioned to shape Nero's character, it was Seneca. And yet, over time, Nero grew increasingly erratic and violent. He ordered the murder of his mother. He eliminated rivals. He consolidated control through fear. Whatever influence Seneca once had, it proved unable to restrain the trajectory of the emperor's rule. This forces us to confront a painful question about the limits of philosophy. Seneca could articulate a compelling theory of character formation. He could explain how internalizing a moral model might shape behavior. But theory operates under assumptions about receptivity. It assumes the student wants to be shaped. It assumes a willingness to submit to moral discipline. Absolute power disrupts those assumptions. When someone has the authority to silence criticism and eliminate opposition, the imagined gaze of a virtuous exemplar may lose its force. The tragedy here is not simply that Nero failed to become a philosopher king. It is that Seneca's own life reveals how fragile moral influence can be when confronted with ambition, fear, and unchecked authority. Advising someone to imagine a moral witness is one thing. Actually serving as that witness within a volatile political system is another. Influence has limits, especially when it depends on proximity to power. There is also a more uncomfortable layer. If Seneca believed so strongly in the power of exemplars, then his inability to guide Nero raises questions about his own authority. Was his example compromised by his political entanglements? Could a man embedded in imperial compromise fully function as a moral North Star? The theory presumes clarity and consistency. His life was marked by tension and accommodation. In this final contrast, what emerges is not simply hypocrisy but limitation. Seneca mastered Stoic language and Stoic reasoning. He understood the architecture of virtue. But understanding does not guarantee control, either over others or over oneself. Philosophy can guide, but it cannot override human will. It cannot neutralize the distortions of absolute power. Taken together, these letters do not present a neat case of fraudulence. They reveal a man stretched between philosophy and politics, between aspiration and reality. The tension is real, and it is never fully resolved. But that unresolved tension may be the very reason the letters continue to resonate. They do not offer us a flawless Stoic sage. They offer us something more recognizable, a powerful, intelligent human being trying and most often failing to live according to principles that he clearly grasped. When we talk about Stoicism, the same names usually come up. Zeno, the founder. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king. Maybe Epictetus, the former slave turned teacher. But far less attention is given to Seneca, even though in his own lifetime he was one of the most influential Stoic voices in Rome. And yet, Seneca presents us with a problem.